our businesses, and our schools. And we understand how important it is to choose elected officials who will represent our values and further our goals. The upcoming mayoral election is important for any number of reasons, and one of them is because finally, after 12 years, an opportunity to pick someone new. I know, it felt like it would never end. You stepped on my joke. Okay. Seriously, the Upper West Side has seen many changes over the last 10 to 12 years. Some of them are good, some less so. And there are many more changes on the horizon. That is why it is essential that we have strong and principled leadership in City Hall who understands what the West Side is all about. And that is precisely why a forum like this tonight is so very important, and why I'm so glad to see such an overflow crowd here. So I'm pleased that the candidates have decided to join us tonight. I look forward to hearing their thoughts on a variety of issues. And could you please all be quiet over there? Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce one last speaker, Mark Landis, who's an attorney, community activist. He's a district leader and the CFD endorsed candidate for city council member. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblymember Rosenthal. It is so exciting to see this size crowd in the room, and it's my pleasure to talk to you for a moment or two about Community Free Democrats, a brief moment. If you are interested in making sure that your voice is heard in the community, whichever candidate you decide you want to support for mayor, CFD gives you an opportunity for your voice to be heard through action. We come here together once a month to talk about issues, and then we also go out to work for the candidates who best embody our Upper West Side values. If you haven't already picked up a membership form or information, please do on the way out. You can also visit us on the web at cfdnyc.org. But again, this is a place to be if you want to put your democratic and progressive values into action. Thank you. Let me turn it back over to Tim to introduce our moderator.
So thank you. That was Mark Landis, our district leader. Our other district leaders are here tonight, Joan Palo and Nick Prigo, representing the 69th Assembly District as well. I would also like to introduce Stefan Russo, who is the Executive Director of Goddard Riverside Community Center.
Well, thank you, Tim. Welcome to our home. I think the last time I saw this many people here in this room, we were serving about 1,000 meals on Thanksgiving and Christmas. Those of you who are over 60 years old, I welcome you to come back and become members of our senior center. Many of you know Goddard Riverside. We've been a bedrock in this neighborhood and community for close to 60 years, and it's really our pleasure, and I think in a true tradition of community centers and settlement houses, that are focus points and places where people can come together and discuss the issues of the day. It's our pleasure actually to have the mayoral candidates here in our home. And also, I'm sure we're going to want to hear them address many of the issues which are critical to the work that we do, whether it's housing, education, homelessness, hunger, needs of seniors. So I think it's fitting that this forum is taking place here at Goddard Riverside Community Center. Welcome to our home. Come back when we have our meal so that you can come join us for a meal and to eat and to see what we do. And Tim and Community Free Democrats, thank you very, very much for co-sponsoring this with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. I'd now like to introduce the chair of the committee that helped put this evening together, Jason Haber.
Thank you. So, just a quick note, we are taking questions tonight also from the audience. Some people have turned in cards already. If you'd like a card, just raise your hand. We'll be going around. We'll make sure you get a card. We are also taking questions tonight on Twitter. So if you are tweeting tonight using the hashtag #CFDdebate, you can ask a question as there is, and we will take at least one question from Twitter tonight. So we will try to do that. I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator tonight, Mr. Ken Terrell, Professor Ken as we call him. Ken told me that he has not seen a room this crowded for a political function since the anti-war debates of the 60s. So that says something, so congratulations everyone for coming out tonight and being here. So, great job everyone. And with that I'll turn it over to Ken and we'll let everything begin. Ken.
Yeah, Ken. Thank you. I thought that many of the people here are people I saw.
Jason, help him.
Okay, let me... It is on. Ready? Okay. Let me just set out. Let me just set out some quick. Let me just set out some quick ground rules, which is that each candidate will get a 2-minute opening statement. Each question gets a 1-minute answer from each candidate. On some minor occasions, I may allow a candidate 30 seconds to rebut if somebody says something really wayward or improper, and everybody will get 1 minute to summarize at the end. Attila, the bell keeper, is somewhere in the audience, and he will raise a piece of paper that says 10 seconds
Okay, got it. See that?
when you are near the end of your allotted time, at which point I will shut you off. Right, like the old days.
Just click off and it goes dead.
I remember those days. Okay. So, did anybody establish an order of speakers? Or should we just go from the start of the to the end? Let's go that way. So the first speaker is Bill Thompson.
Thank you, Ken. Let me say what a pleasure it is to be here this evening with Community Free Democrats, Goddard Rivers.
Please stand up.
Wait a second. The gentleman over there asked me to sit down.
It's exercise class.
It is. Tell you what. Look, let me say again what a pleasure it is to be here this evening and to see a room full of people who are concerned about the future of New York City. I'm Bill Thompson, former New York City Comptroller, former president of the New York City Board of Education. I want to be the next mayor of the city of New York. I think that it is important as we look at the future of New York City. I want to be a mayor who makes sure that New York City stays safe. This has become the safest big city in America. We need to make sure that New York City stays safe. At the same point, we don't have to sacrifice our constitutional rights through the misuse of stop and frisk. It can be used appropriately, but we need to make sure that it is used or not being misused the way it's being done right now. I want to make sure that we have an education system that works for our children, because right now our children are not being educated. We need a school system, again, with an educator at the top. Tired of business people running our school system. And we need to focus on comprehension and critical thinking and get past this teaching to the test. It is clear. And we'll give the chance to talk about a number of other things. We need to grow small business in the city of New York. The city needs to stop taxing, fining, and making it difficult for our small businesses to grow. And if we don't start to build real affordable housing in the city of New York, low, moderate, and middle income housing, there are going to be a lot of us 4 years from now who will not be here. Last but not least, City of New York and the number of things it does, whether it is its taxes, and I'm talking about things like water rates, assessments that continue to go up, fines and fees and penalties. Go get a parking ticket, you almost need a second job to pay that parking ticket off. But through its actions, New York City continues to squeeze its working and middle class out of New York City. We need a mayor who understands all New Yorkers again and represents all 5 boroughs. I want to be that person. I'm Bill Thompson. Thank you all.
And now Chris Quinn.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you everybody here at CFD, particularly your president, Tim. I want to thank your District Leaders Mark Landis and Joan Palo and Nick Pringo. I want to thank Assemblymember Rosenthal for being with us here as well, and thank CFD for all the great elected officials you brought us in Manhattan, not the least of which our Borough President Scott Stringer, our great Congressmember Jerry Nadler, so thank you. Stephen, thank you for hosting us and for all the great work that gets done here at God Riverside, and Jason, thank you for leading the effort to hold tonight's forum together. I've had the great honor of serving as the City Council Speaker for the past 7.5 years. And in that period of time, many of us in this room working together have been able to accomplish great things for this city. Passing 7 balanced on-time budgets. Budgets that every time there's been a proposal to close a firehouse and compromise public safety stood up and said no and prevented that from happening. Budgets that when we faced real threats to lay off 4,100 school teachers, I came together with my colleagues. We didn't just hold press conferences, we stopped those layoffs from happening. In the 7.5 years I've been Speaker, we've all worked together. We've passed more pro-tenant legislation than any city council in history. Now in the City of New York, because of the work I've done in the City Council, if your landlord is harassing you, for the first time ever, you can take your landlord to court for that harassment and be able to stand up for your rights. Or working together, we've been able to expand affordable housing in neighborhoods throughout the city. Working together last year with Assemblymember Rosenthal's help, we got Albany to pass legislation that come September will make kindergarten mandatory in the 5 boroughs. And together we've brought 10,000 new full-day pre-kindergarten seats to the City of New York. Now that's a record as Speaker that I believe has delivered for the people of New York City. And what I want to do as mayor, working with CFD and all of you and New Yorkers in every borough, is make this city an even greater place of opportunity for the middle class and all those families that are working so hard to get into the middle class. And that means expanding affordable housing. That's why I've proposed to create 40,000 new middle-income housing units over the next 10 years. It means improving education. That's why I've called for a pilot program to expand the school day, starting off in 100 schools in the lowest income neighborhoods. It means growing good jobs. That's why I've called for neighborhood-based economic development across the city. Things like in the Sunset Park Marine Terminal. We could grow 2,000 jobs in the areas in Sunset Park, good manufacturing jobs. All of that is possible if we continue to come together and believe our job as government is not just to criticize, but to deliver for New Yorkers in the way I've done for 7.5 years as the Speaker of the City Council. Thank you all for being out here tonight. I would say it looks like we're giving away, the next brand of free iPhones or something. This room is so crowded. So thank you all for being here.
Control of you.
Thank you, Professor. Well, good evening, everyone. It is so delightful to see all of you out here at Goddard Riverside. And I do want to thank Community Free Democrats for hosting this most productive, I would say in advance, most productive forum to talk about issues of grave importance to all of our fellow New Yorkers. For the last 3 years and change, I've had the privilege of serving as City Comptroller. Not an easy time to be Chief Financial Officer of anything, let alone the great city of New York, but I start every morning excited to have the opportunity to serve and help lead our city in the right direction. And it's been about reducing wasteful spending. I'm very proud of the record that I've established, restoring billions of dollars to city coffers at a time when wasteful spending cannot be tolerated, especially when there are all these proposed budget cuts and service reductions. It's about keeping an eye on the economy, ensuring that jobs are created. I'm proud of the plans I've put together to use a combination of historically low interest rates as well as our capital construction plan to put people to work as well as save taxpayers money in the long run. It's also about keeping an eye on the overall economy and how we are being treated in this city, a city that we have seen an incredible wealth gap grow further and further out of control, where the middle class is disappearing, the working poor are left behind, and the rich continue to get filthy rich. This is an economic development policy that does not serve us well for our future. I've got a number of proposals to start bringing this wealth gap under control and to help ensure that the future of New York City means a prosperity that is shared by everybody. We've got all sorts of affordable housing plans that we need to get underway because ours is a growing city. And I think that rather than trying to run away from the problem, we've got to embrace the opportunities that present themselves with growth. In many ways, I am still shocked that I stand before you talking about running for mayor of this great city. As an immigrant kid, growing up here in New York City pretty much my whole life, though I was born in Taiwan, my neck is still stamped made in Taiwan back here. I had a chance to come to New York, a city that has always represented incredible dreams for people all throughout the world. That if you come here, you work hard, you dream big, and then you work even harder, you can succeed. But I think that that promise has been lost somewhat in recent years, particularly the lack of opportunities and the uneven playing field that too many people are experiencing as they're even trying to climb up to the top. Yeah. And so it is my mission to restore that promise of New York and to see that we have great democracy as being evidenced here. You know, democracy that is fully participatory. We've got elected officials. We've got people who aspire to be elected officials. And we've got people who are demanding more of their government. This is exactly what I love to see, of course, in contrast to what happened a number of years ago when they turned the term limits on their head. That's something that I think we're going to talk about tonight, a travesty of democracy. I felt that was back in 2008. Something I certainly did not want to have anything to do with. Today, we present ourselves with an incredible opportunity to talk about all the issues that make New York City great and what we can do collectively to make New York City even greater. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Professor, and congratulations to all of you for coming out and the organizers. This is a great event. My name is Sal Albanese, and I'm the only non-career politician in this race. I have a record of independence. I'm not accepting contributions from lobbyists or developers. I'm committed to putting the people in charge of City Hall. Let me give you a bit about my background. I came here as an immigrant at the age of 8, grew up in a working class neighborhood in Brooklyn where my mother raised us on a garment worker's salary. The public schools, the libraries, the sports programs that the city provided helped to elevate my family from the working class to the middle class. I'm running for mayor because I want to do the same thing for future generations of New Yorkers. And I'm worried that the political class is letting them slip away. I think with your help, we can change that. I spent 11 years as a New York City public school teacher, and I understand education from the ground up. I mean, we all agree that universal pre-K is needed. We have to stop teaching to the test, and we have to stop closing schools. Yeah. The difference is, I have a plan. When I talk to parents in Harlem or Bedford-Stuyvesant, they know that IQ is not the problem. Poverty is the problem. As mayor, I plan on establishing pediatric wellness centers in low-income communities around the city. It will be a multidisciplinary approach with parents, teachers, and doctors working together. I think it's political malpractice not to address that, given what we know now about the first 3 years of a child's life. They are pivotal. We also have a jobs problem. We have a lot of brain power in this city. We need to create jobs to pay the bills. To accomplish any of this, we need a government that works for its people. Right now, we have a political class that's out of touch with citizens, spends more time at cocktail parties than they do listening to their constituents. My opponents are part of the problem. They instead of offering new ideas, they play it safe, and if they get elected, they'll be indebted to every lobbyist in town. I want to be a different kind of mayor. I want to make decisions on the merits. I want to tell the truth, even if it's politically risky, and I want to give regular people a voice in City Hall. Together, with your help, we can build a better New York. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I should explain that Bill de Blasio is on his way. He's running late, had a prior engagement, will be here. And at some point we will allow him to speak. Okay. This is the reform movement. Okay. So we start with some questions, and we'll work our way down the panel, alternating the first person each way. 1 minute for each response. We often say that sunlight is the best disinfectant to corruption. Do you think that the open meetings law should apply to organizations that receive funding from member items?
Well, first of all, I have called for the elimination of member items. Of course, I would support member items are what council members dole out every year to community groups on a discretionary basis, which has been you've seen some of the headlines in the local press recently where that money has been abused, there's corruption, fraud, and there are some great member items that help communities. But I think the fact is that we have this pocket of money that should be doled out objectively. We shouldn't have council members doing it. There's no rationale for having a community receive $10 million in member items and another community receive $1 million. It's taxpayer money simply because maybe the speaker doesn't like that particular person, that they can do that with taxpayer money. So let's eliminate member items, and let's structure the system in a way that good organizations get funded, and we'll see a lot of some of the corruption issues that you've seen in the press lately be diminished. This has been going on for quite a few years. I called for its elimination when I was a city council member back in the 1990s.
Maybe unfair to you to have you drop in the middle of the question, but the question was, we often say that sunlight is the best disinfectant to corruption. Do you think that the open meetings law should apply to organizations that receive funding from member items?
Should the open meetings law apply?
Right.
Well, I believe in the open meetings law as a general, idea of anything related to. Oh, sorry. Give a quick answer, but first, thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to CFD and Goddard Riverside. I apologize. I was at a New York County Democratic Party screening meeting. I apologize for being late. I'm a believer in the open meetings law. I'm a believer in all the reforms that came out from the Watergate era and beyond, the Freedom of Information Act, etc. I certainly believe that anything that is publicly funded and supported should be based on those principles, or should follow those principles. But I want to pick up on what Sal said very quickly, that I also agree that member items as they're used now, they just don't work in terms of a democratic society that requires transparency and fairness. Member items right now, unfortunately, have been utilized by some in an illegal manner. We've seen now the 4th city council member in a handful of years get in trouble with crimes related to member items. Also, I agree with the point that member items are being used as a tool of political retribution. We had Councilmember Vallone and Councilmember Crowley talk about the way their districts were had member item money taken away for political retribution. So I've proposed an end to member item money replaced by participatory budgeting at a community level, which is now happening in some council districts to great effect. I gotta tell you, a system, and I participated in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, a system where any citizen can walk in and vote on how taxpayer money will be used for organizations in their district is a superior system. It is open and transparent. It is not based on political privilege and political whim and political retribution. Member items are no longer being utilized at the federal or the state level. It is time for New York City to catch up and achieve this reform immediately.
Thank you very much. The quick answer is yes, the open meetings law should apply to organizations or anybody that gets taxpayers' money. Taxpayers' money is something that I consider sacred as city controller. I've been very proud to have achieved levels of transparency that we have never seen before in the city. If you go to checkbooknyc.com, this is literally the city's checkbook, which is your checkbook. So you can go online, and just as you could go online on your bank to see your bank account, your checking account, you can see every single expenditure, for what purpose, by date, by amount. You can sort, you can download. And this level of transparency allows for a clear disclosure of all the money that's being used by those who spend it. And it actually makes all of us, including most of us here who are charged with spending the taxpayers' dime, much more judicious about how we spend that money. And whether it be city agencies, elected officials, or organizations that are funded by taxpayers' money, I do believe that the greater the transparency is, the less the potential for things that we certainly do not want to see being spent with our taxpayers' money. So the answer to you, Professor, is absolutely. Thank you.
I agree, obviously, that transparency is the best thing you can bring to any system. And that's why if you look at how discretionary funding exists now in the City Council, it is completely different than what it was like when I started as Speaker 7.5 years ago. If you want to know what groups have applied and gotten funded, which council member or members requested that funding, you can, right on the internet, all that information is there. That never existed before. And every group that is now funded has to go through a detailed screening process, not just by the Speaker's office, but by the Mayor's Office of Contracts and by all of the city agencies that they contract with. What it's alleged that Councilmember Halloran tried to do, if it's true, that would have been caught by 3 different changes we've put into the process. Now, as it relates to the open meetings law, all of the entities that are funded through council member discretionary funding, places like Goddard Riverside, places like your local Little League, places like the food pantries in all of our neighborhoods, places like after-school programs in our schools or PTAs and other things of that nature, all of those have to have openness in the sense that anyone can come and participate. I guess the open meetings question speaks to their board of directors, and I would say if that's something we're going to put in place for discretionary funding, we should put it in place for all city funding, not just discretionary, but any taxpayer funding, because just because you get it from an RFP doesn't mean it should be treated differently than discretionary funding. And as long as an organization would have the ability to go to executive session or something like that if they needed to discuss confidential or personnel matters, I wouldn't have a problem with that, but I would want to have one standard for all taxpayer dollars and make sure the organizations had that ability, because some personnel matters, for example, you would need to be able to discuss outside of it, and I believe the law allows for that type of a provision.
First, when it comes to every city dollar, every taxpayer dollar, we need to have transparency and openness, and this should be no different. That the highest level of scrutiny should be paid to discretionary dollars. I have to admit, in looking at Councilman Halloran's concerns, it seemed to indicate that there are still loopholes in the system of how discretionary dollars are being given out and being done. And I am concerned also about the fact that discretionary dollars can be used to punish council people, but really to punish communities and depriving them of those dollars. We need to make sure that we go to a certain baseline amount for each council district. And then let those dollars also be driven, after that, by need across those districts. I think that's important. So in looking at should there be discretion, should there be the highest level of transparency in these dollars? Absolutely. Do we need to make sure that they're open? And I would agree. It needs to be one standard. Every dollar that's spent, not just in small amounts, but in large amounts, we need to make sure that there's openness for all of it. There has to be one standard and one standard of honesty in the city of New York. We have to make sure that everybody who receives money from us is held to that one standard. So I'm not against discretionary dollars. We have to pay more attention to those, because obviously there are still loopholes that exist. And those who are crooked will you try and use those loopholes. So transparency, yes. One standard for every taxpayer dollar, yes.
As a rule, I'm going to try to avoid questions that sound as long as essay exam questions, but this is an exception.
That looks a little long there.
Yeah. Community centers like Goddard Riverside, our host tonight, are often caught in the middle of an annual budget dance, usually choreographed by mayors and used as bargaining chips. How will you end this shameful process and ensure adequate, stable funding for community centers and social service agencies? Also, how do you feel about these agencies' dependence on member items as a vital source of funding? That would feel good.
Sorry, Ken. You know, the issue of the budget dance, and let me just take a second to explain that a little more, if that's okay, is what happens every year. And it's happened as long as I've been involved in city government, Mayor Dinkins, Mayor Giuliani, Mayor Bloomberg. The mayor, even in years where we aren't facing budget cuts, when he puts out the budget, will cut every program the city council had put in or restored the year before. Now, I think we can all agree, not every idea the city council has is great, but it's impossible to say every idea we've ever had to put into the budget is terrible and should be cut out. And what does that mean? Funding for senior centers get cut out. Funding for libraries gets cut out. Funding for middle school extra initiatives get cut out. And it creates a almost false budgeting in a way that sometimes you're fighting over restoring things when there's enough money, and other times when we have real financial crises as we've had, the numbers balloon tremendously. It also makes it impossible for organizations to do long-term planning. Now, I've spoken out against the budget dance since the day I became speaker. And as a result of that, we're not where I think we should be, but we, under my leadership working with the council, have gotten more historical council initiatives into the baseline, which means they're into the foundation of the city's budget and part of the mayor's executive and not part of this budget dance. We need to continue that fundamentally and make sure that whoever of us is the next mayor, and when I'm the next mayor, that we have a budget that reflects priorities, that reflects our real priorities and has the things in the executive that are the foundation of city services and removes these games. We also have to get the budget, if we really want to end the budget dance, in compliance with the city charter. The city charter is specific, that basically every allocation should have its own unit of appropriation. So you could have real transparency, and you could go into the budget by unit of appropriation and find the items you want your taxpayer dollars to fund. The charter, the budget is and has almost always been since 1989 out of compliance with those units of appropriation. It's something I spoke about in my first State of the City speech. We made progress, not enough. My budget will not include the budget dance and will include units of appropriation, as it should, so it can really be a priority and transparent document.
I think the budget dance is just purely wasteful. You know, every year, and we have seen this for so many years in a row now, every year the mayor proposes a budget that slashes important things that people need, things like library services, after-school programs, fire companies, and he starts this cha-cha by saying that we don't have enough money for any of this. And then the council members weigh in with their foxtrot, talk about how it's deplorable that the mayor would cut libraries, fire companies, and after-school programs. And then the salsa begins on the steps of City Hall, where you have community members and groups from all over the city camped out on the steps of City Hall saying that, you know, protesting, how can the city cut these vital services? And then, of course, after months of all this, the mayor and the council speaker waltz in with a miraculous deal that all of those things that were proposed to be cut are actually saved, and it's not going to happen. The draconian cuts are not going to happen. We see this choreographed year after year after year. Number one, it's a waste of people's time.
Yeah.
It's a waste of government resources to have this budget dance go like this every single year. More importantly, it focuses the public on anywhere between $200 to $400 million a year in a budget that is $70 billion. This budget dance hoodwinks the public into thinking that the budget is only 0.5% of what it really is. What we need truly is participatory budgeting that allows people to see the totality of the city's budget. Now, not all of the budget is flexible. About $38 billion of the $70 billion is inflexible. They are mandates that we must adhere to, that we must pay for. But it's still $32 billion of money that the public, through elected officials and through advocates, can have some sway over to make sure that the budgetary items truly reflect the needs of New Yorkers. So let's get rid of this ridiculous dance that comes year in and year out, and let's truly make sure that the budget reflects the will and the priorities of everybody in New York City.
Amen.
Although I agree with some of John Liu's assessment, I'm personally offended he did not include the merengue or the Charleston. I mean, there's a lot of very important dances, John, that needed to be acknowledged here today. Look, let's be clear what this is. First, the budget process doesn't fundamentally look at where the real money is. It focuses on the few hundred million and does not focus on the tens of billions. Where the action is for community-based organizations is in the RFP process, is in the big funding streams. That's where they live or die. And in the Bloomberg years, so much more money was diverted away from community-based organizations, away from organizations that built up over decades, that helped build community leadership, and exhibited progressive values. And that's the real scandal here, that the big money was flowing out of the neighborhood level, but that wasn't being picked up in this whole discussion, in this whole process. There's a certain bait and switch quality to the budget dance because it deflects attention from that which is most important. But I have to respectfully say to Speaker Quinn, you say you spoke out against it, but your chief ally, Michael Bloomberg, and you participated in it year after year, and I think there were things you could have done to stop that you didn't do. The budget dance is also historically a tool of political control used by mayors, used by council speakers to keep everyone in line, just like the member item process is. And it is unworthy of a city this great in the year 2013 that this is still going on. It's unworthy of us that until a few years ago, including during some of Speaker Quinn's watch, none of us knew even where the member item money was going, what the final allocation was to nonprofits until the day that the budget was printed. So I think it's not just about ending the dance. It's about ending the political rules that simply allow a mayor and a speaker to dominate the process in the way they have through the budget dance. Thank you.
I was on the city council for 15 years, from 82 to 97, and I watched this budget dance every year with I felt so bad for the advocates who really run great programs in the city, having to stay on the steps of City Hall when they could be providing services for people simply to try to get their great programs funded because of the political games that have been played and continue to be played in terms of member items, and of course every year the firehouses are going to be closed, and you know the city council members run, they have press conferences, and you know, and it's the same old nonsense. And of course the firehouses are always saved, and then there's a huge rally at City Hall.
Not all of them. Not all of them.
Most of them. And as John pointed out, all of these dances are predictable every single year. Let's end this nonsense, and let's put good programs. Let's baseline them. If they're good, let's stop this folly every single year. And of course, many of these advocates, by the way, get shaken down for campaign contributions by elected officials who claim to save them. So we should also ban campaign contributions from people who are receiving nonprofit funds from the city of New York, because they really have no choice. They're almost coerced. And I've called, and Bill is talking about reform, but he participated in this for years in the city council. I'm glad that he's finally come around to my viewpoint. I have called for rules changes at the council level years ago. I want to eliminate stipends. No sophisticated legislature across America gives people additional money for chairing committees. It's a form of control. It's a privilege to chair a committee. You shouldn't get $10,000 or $8,000, and if you don't vote with the leadership, they strip you of that committee. It's nonsense, and it's bad government. Let's end it, and I'm hoping Speaker Quinn will support my efforts in that area.
We have heard year after year after year, this is a bad process. It shouldn't continue. And year after year after year, it does. We need to have a mayor who just says no. The old just say no. We're not going to play this game. We're not going to do this. We're going to be honest with the people of the city of New York. We're not going to take all the nonprofits and the people in neighborhoods, and I participated in the rallies too. We've been out there talking about don't close firehouses, or fund, youth programs, or fund organizations like this. And every year we turn around and we are half grateful, even though we know we've been used, even though we know we've been misled, even though we know we are part of that budget dance. And by the way, one thing, John, we need to throw some disco stuff in here also. But
I didn't know I was going to have to be a full DJ like that.
But it is time that we just said no, and that we had a mayor who was honest with the people of the city, that we just said, this is where the money is, this is what we're going to spend, and we sit down. If there are some adjustments, we sit down and work on those adjustments, not go through we're going to close firehouses, we're going to close this institution, we're going to shut nonprofits down. It isn't fair. It isn't fair. It doesn't allow for real budgeting for organizations like this. And also, I'm tired of watching children and so many others, and our seniors, dragged in front of City Hall so everybody can look like a hero at the end of the process. It needs to stop. We need to have a mayor who just says no.
I'm going to abuse the power of the chair here and warn everybody that if you keep on going overtime on the questions, I'm going to have to leave out the easy questions. But we have our first Twitter question. When you're mayor, what will be the first Bloomberg policy you plan to change and or overhaul?
I think we're going down back.
I'm going to need more than 1 minute for that.
Where do you get started?
Well, I think let's start with the schools. The problem with our schools right now is that these public schools are being operated as business divisions reporting up to DOE Corporation. Yeah. And that just does not serve our students well. What we need to stop the nonsense of school closures and co-locations that I think have actually restricted educational choice more than they have actually enhanced. And we've got to reduce the over-reliance on these high-stakes once-a-year exams. My son Joey, who actually is a 7th grader not very far from here, just down the street, he spends so much of his year getting ready for these tests. And I'm not convinced that he's actually learning better because of all this test prep. I think it actually distracts from the real mission of educating our kids, making sure that they are learning more. In fact, although I believe that there should be less reliance on these high-stakes once-a-year exams, I think that there should actually be more tests in our schools. But tests by way of pop quizzes given once or every other week, formulated and administered by teachers, not for the purpose of reporting numbers up to corporate headquarters, but for the purpose of trying to determine whether the kids are actually learning in the classroom or not. That's what should be done with our kids. But the problem with that, 10 more seconds. The problem with that model is that that requires the DOE, the chancellor, and the mayor to actually trust teachers to teach. It requires them to trust principals to lead. Unfortunately, this corporate model has done away with actual learning environments in the schools. We have to restore learning environments so that our kids can actually learn as opposed to get ready to take the test. Thank you.
I agree with John. I don't know where to get started, and I could talk about immediate changes on small business policy or paid sick days or stop and frisk, but the thing I would say where I have a double disagreement with Bloomberg is where I'd start. The mayor said repeatedly we should not tax the wealthiest New Yorkers. I disagree. The mayor has said repeatedly that he will not invest further in early childhood education. I disagree. Let's combine those concepts. I have proposed a tax on the wealthiest New Yorkers, those who make $500,000 or more, so that we can have full-day universal pre-K for every single New York City child who needs it. And, as they say on late-night television advertising, but wait, there's more. Also, an after-school seat for every middle school child who needs it. That combination of an investment in early childhood and an investment at the middle school level can actually start to turn our school system around. By the way, our wealthy friends are not going to leave if, as my tax would require, if they make $1 million a year, for example, they will pay $2,000 more a year to the city so we can have good schools. They're not going to leave because of that. But we can't fix the schools without it. And I say that as public servant, and I say that as public school parent. This is job one. We fix our schools, we can start to fix everything else in this city.
In a $70 billion budget, education has to be the top priority because it does impact everything else. As I pointed out earlier, I spent 11 years as a New York City public school teacher, so the Bloomberg approach is going to be it's going to be altered under my administration. We're going to focus on the real issues. One is, as I pointed out, my pediatric wellness centers. 3, we have to impact young people from when they're born up to 3 years of age and ongoing. Pre-K, of course, small class size. But those first 3 years, the scientific evidence is compelling. We need to address it, and we have an example of it. The Harlem Children's Zone has a baby college, which is very successful. We need to expand that around the city. And the other area that I will focus on as a former school teacher is better training, real student teaching experience. When I was a student teacher, it was cursory in nature, the training that I received. When I got into John Jay High School, my first teaching job, I really didn't feel confident as a teacher because really you have to spend an awful lot of time becoming adept as a teacher. So I'm proposing an internship-like program the senior year, like doctors go through. So when a teacher steps into that classroom, that first day, they're ready to go. And of course, it takes about 7 years to become a really good teacher. You need to support the teachers early on, videotape, critique, mentoring. That's very important, because effective teachers make a big difference. So those are my 2 priorities. They get to the core of everything else. Obviously, there are other things we need to do, but those 2 are very important.
I think the thing that I'd want to change day one, and I started out and mentioned it, I want to see an educator at the top of our school system again. I mentioned I'm the former president of the Board of Education. I had the opportunity to work with some excellent educators. People like Ray Cortinez, people like Rudy Crew. They were real educators. They put an educational vision forward. What we've seen, Joel Klein, a business person. Kathy Black. And Dennis Walcott. Dennis, nice guy. But Dennis Walcott isn't an educator. We need an educator again at the top of the New York City public school system. That's the first thing that I would change. In addition to that, what we have witnessed in school closings. 2 weeks ago, the mayor announced they're opening 76 new schools in September of next year, or of this year. 76 new schools. One of the reporters said, "What do you think?" I said, "Go back and find out how many of those are schools that were closed. How many of those are schools that are being opened up and schools that have been closed? And the answer, or how many weren't? 2. There are only 2 real new schools there. They are closing schools as opposed to working to keep those schools open. And I'm not saying let's hold on to failed schools. There are things that exist and have existed before. Something called the Chancellor's District, where you took a school that was failing. You capped the admission, or you capped the size of the school. Smaller class size, intensive teacher training, regimented curriculum. You put additional dollars into those schools, and those schools turned around. This administration believes that school closings are educational policy. So they've given up on our communities and given up on our schools and our children. That needs to change day one. And that would be my first priority, making sure that educator at the top puts forward a real educational vision, and we stop these needless closings of schools so we can say, look how many new schools we've reopened. It's a joke.
Now, I could say end field testing, so we could reduce the amount of time our children are taking standardized tests. I could say move away from the first thing we do for small businesses being fines and not warnings. But let me talk about something that I think is fundamental to keeping New York City a place where working class families and middle class families have housing options. Mayor Bloomberg from day one has stood in firm opposition to repealing the Erstat law in Albany. I want to be a mayor who leads the tenant lobby day in Albany. A mayor who makes it their mission to bring the power of the rent laws back to the city of New York so we can strengthen the rent laws. We can bring back rent stabilization to what it once was and be in a place where we can have enough rental housing for middle class families to stay in every neighborhood. Now, we also have to recognize that we need to make other changes in our housing structure. Right now, and this neighborhood knows it as much as any, our homeless shelters are busting at the seams because we've taken away the programs that give homeless people an exit out of shelter. I would also on day one put in place a real voucher program, not Advantage, a real voucher program that would give homeless families the resources they need to move out of the shelter system into permanent housing, and I would scrap any attempt to take the ill-conceived and, quite frankly, cruel policies of the Giuliani administration, that there have been attempts to expand to single homeless people and scrap those entirely. I'm happy to say we in the council have sued against the expansion of those and so far won, and we'll continue our advocacy in court. But when I'm mayor, we won't need that at all because that idea will just be dropped. And I hope that way, through bringing tenant laws back to us and a voucher program, will really expand housing options for all folks in the city of New York.
I'm going to try to speed things up with our favorite lightning round type of... I'm sorry, we'll try to ask you different questions.
Ken, you're so much more sophisticated than that.
All right, you go last. Yes, I know, one-word, two-word answers. You know, these will be fast, like...
You hope.
Yeah, I do. So, I mean, what borough do you know best?
Obviously, the borough that I live in, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn?
I'm a Queens boy.
My home borough, Manhattan.
I may live in Manhattan, but I know Brooklyn better than I know Manhattan.
When did you last live in a rental apartment and what was the rent?
I last lived in a rental apartment in Park Slope when it was a working class neighborhood. And the rent was about $60 a month.
Why'd you move?
When? 1969, actually.
1992 to 1998, my wife and I lived in a rental apartment in Park Slope until we had our second child, Dante, and then we outgrew it, and I think the rent, wow, I want to say $1,800 a month. I want to say that, but I'm not sure that's right.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I agree. No, 2098.
Okay.
98.
Last time I paid rent was 1993, and the rent was $700 a month. $700 a month in Queens back in 1993, and then my wife and I bought our house, which was actually really cheap at the time, and now it's escalated in price, which is why I firmly believe that we should encourage home ownership to the maximum extent possible.
I lived in a rent-protected apartment until about 3 years ago. It was in London Terrace in Chelsea. I moved in about '92, and the rent when I moved in was about $900, and when I moved out about 3 years ago, it was around $2,000.
It was an apartment in Park Slope. As a matter of fact, it was a great apartment on Carroll Street in Park Slope, and I think it was, 1982, and I think the rent then was about $600.
Park Slope, the cradle of candidates.
The city's version of Virginia.
Do you support or oppose the commuter tax? Do you support or oppose the commuter tax?
Support. It should be used to underwrite mass transit in New York City.
Support, and I would do everything I could as mayor to get it back and get it to be used for mass transit as soon as we possibly can. But on top of that, we have to be vigilant not to lose the payroll tax we now have. We need to fight to keep that, but we have to get the commuter tax back.
Absolutely support the restoration of the commuter tax. It's only fair that people who spend really the majority of their waking hours in New York City but don't actually sleep in New York City, pay their fair share of the taxes to support our infrastructure. It's costing us more than $1 billion a year in lost revenue. We have to do everything we can to fight to get it back. Thank you.
Support the commuter tax. It was one of the saddest days in the history of New York City and New York State when we lost something we deserved for the narrowest political reasons. And to get the commuter tax back, guess what we need? A Democratic state Senate. And I would work every day to get that too.
I support the commuter tax. It's $1 billion of lost revenue. It's to me, it typifies how dysfunctional the political system is that we actually lost it. Commuters weren't even complaining about the commuter tax, and the legislature just let them evaporated the tax because there's some stupid Senate race up in Rockland County. It's once again one of the big problems that we face that we don't talk about often here is how dysfunctional the political system is, and that we need to address. And there are a lot of reforms you have to put into place. And the commuter tax is Exhibit A.
Melting pot or gorgeous mosaic?
Want me to jump in?
Yeah.
Well, I worked for David Dinkins, and I'm going to go with gorgeous mosaic for that reason. But I have to say, it also gets to the point more. Melting pot suggests we were all supposed to let go of everything that made us special and was what our culture is. And I believe the city celebrates and empowers everyone to be about their culture of heritage and wherever they're going in the world as well. I think gorgeous mosaic.
I would agree, gorgeous mosaic. New York City is is a true experiment for the world because we have so many people here. If we can get along and get together here, there's hope for the entire world. So it's a great city for that reason. John? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we came in fast. We can't, by the way, we can't figure out the microphones, so you should question whether any of us should be mayor this time.
Or at the very least, I'm standing up to get the microphone and help enable things. So.
This microphone thing is very complicated.
How about some real questions?
I think it is.
Real questions, Prof.
given the diversity of New York City, and that is what makes us so strong, it would have to be Mosaic.
We may get unanimity on this. I don't want to put any pressure on John, but I would agree. Gorgeous Mosaic in this, and I think that the public advocate's right. That speaks more to who we are as a city, and it also, I think, reminds us that the things that make us different are in fact the things that make us all similar and unite us so strongly as a city together. And I just, towards that end, want to make note of two unfortunate things that have happened in the city in the past couple of days. We've had two attacks that the police are looking at as anti-Muslim hate crimes. One in Queens, one in the Bronx. So this is a time we need to stand strongly as that gorgeous Mosaic and make sure in particular we're standing up for our Muslim brothers and sisters and those who may be targeted as Muslim in violent ways across the city. So that's a message of we need to spend incredibly strongly, particularly right now in our 5 boroughs, given their attack.
I certainly second everything that Chris just said. Obviously, gorgeous Mosaic, and I'm proud in many ways to have contributed to the gorgeous Mosaic. At least, people, for how many years now, I have been called the first Asian American council member, the first Asian American controller, possibly the first Asian American mayor. This big deal about first Asian American because it's new to some people. But honestly, for me myself, it's not really anything new. I've been Asian my whole life.
A real question from a real person in the audience. Can you represent the interests of tenants when you take money from developers?
I think your record is what talks about it. For years, as controller, before that, after that, I've stood with tenants in this city. Stood and fought for making sure the controls are there. When I was controller, we watched people who were being pushed out on Mitchell-Lamas. We worked to make sure that they weren't. When they needed dollars at a certain point in different places, we put pension dollars forward so that landlords could use those dollars to be able to renovate apartments and keep them in the Mitchell-Lama program. Can you represent? It's not a question of dollars from developers. It's a question of what do you believe in. You stand up and fight for renters. You stand up and fight for those who live in the city of New York. I've done that all my life. So, while I haven't rented in years, I have stood up and continue to stand up and fight for the rights of those who rent and need to have affordable rents to be able to live in the city of New York. So it's not a question of taking money. It's a question of standing up and fighting for those who need to be fought for. That's what I stand up for. That's what I believe in. That's what the mayor of the city of New York should be doing.
In my time as Speaker, I'm incredibly proud of what we've done for tenants, and as Mayor, I would really want to be known as a tenants mayor. One of my first acts as Speaker was to pass the Safe Housing Law. It's a historic piece of legislation that's changed how we deal with substandard housing. We focus now, in addition to everything else, on the 200 worst buildings in this city a year. Give them extra attention. I've got to tell you, one of my proudest days in government was I'd gone to the first safe housing building. It was in terrible disarray in Brooklyn. I went back months later, and it was in wonderful, wonderful shape. We've taken what we learned in the Safe Housing Law and expanded it. We've taken what we learned through that expansion and passed a law that requires owners to fix the underlying conditions and the problems of your buildings. Not just to paint over a hole in your ceiling with paint, but get to the cause of it. We've also, in my time as Speaker, cracked down on unscrupulous landlords across the city who bought properties that they couldn't afford, let them fall into disarray, and now banks own them. 100,000 units we could lose that way, and through my office, we've gotten the Department of Housing to expand their work on that. And the tenant harassment law that I mentioned before, a law for the first time ever in the city of New York allows you to sue your landlord for deliberate harassment. Well, let me tell you, that law was so good, it was sued by the landlord lobby, and we won in court. So I'll continue that kind of aggressive pro tenant ends up getting sued by the landlord, work in court when I'm mayor. That's why right now my staff is working with HPD and tenant advocates to do a complete overhaul of our housing maintenance code. Something that hasn't happened since it was written. That's the kind of real delivering and real change we need to get to make sure every tenant in the city of New York has a decent home and gets what they pay for when they pass their rent. So I can tell tenants I can deliver as mayor because I've delivered as speaker.
Thank you. And, you know, New York City is still a tenant-driven city. 2/3, unlike most other major American cities, a full 2/3 of our residents are renters. And so we do need to protect our renters in terms of having the homes that they can afford. In addition to the wealth gap that we have seen spiral out of control this past decade, we have also seen a spike in the number of households that are now paying rents that are deemed unaffordable by the federal government. This is a trend that has to change. And to get back to the original question, you know, I'm very proud that I am going to represent the interests of tenants because I'm the only, well, Sal and I, right Sal? Sal and I are the only ones up here who do not accept contributions from people who do business with the city, including many of the developers who are trying to get zoning bonuses and all the special favors. And so I'll let Sal speak for himself. I'll be able to represent the tenants, 2/3 of our city, very well without any potential conflicts. By the way, I'll just take this quick opportunity to point out that Sal gets off scot-free. Meanwhile, me, even though I have a very high ethical bar when it comes to my campaign fundraising, I seem to be the only guy who has an investigation into his fundraising. I'm very proud of the way my campaign has conducted our fundraising. We'll continue to do so. We're fully funded for the campaign. And I'm very proud of the ethical bars and constraints that I've set for my own campaign. Thank you.
I think it's pretty widely understood in this city that the real estate industry thinks it has a tremendous power in the electoral process, and it has played favorites over the years. And I don't think it's a secret who are some of the candidates they feel better about and who are some of the candidates they feel worse about. I can tell you for a fact that because I've challenged the real estate industry on a host of issues. I've challenged them on the fact that we have to tax the wealthiest New Yorkers. I've challenged them on paid sick days. I've challenged them on living wage. I've challenged them on the fact that in too many cases they're not giving us the kind of community benefits we need in development and not keeping to some of the deals that they've made. So I think I've made very, very clear that we need a new deal in this city when it comes to the relationship between the city government and real estate. I think the Bloomberg years were a time when, even when public benefits were agreed to, there was no guarantee at all they would be enforced. And that has to end. And finally, you know, having authored the Worst Landlords Watch List these last 4 years, which has been an extraordinary tool for helping tenants, for helping get buildings that didn't have heat and hot water and basic repairs, and using community organizing tactics, tenant organizing and shaming of the landlords who were doing the wrong thing. We've been able to help thousands and thousands of tenants and actually get some buildings out of private hands and into nonprofit hands. That's the kind of leadership I believe in, and that's the direction I think the city has to go in.
And Professor, that's a great question because it gets to the very core of what ails our political system, not only locally but nationally, which is the infusion of huge sums of money that creates incredible conflicts of interest. And I want to commend John for not accepting contributions like myself from developers. Not because I'm anti-development, because I want to make decisions on the merits. Everywhere I go in the city, people complain about development issues. Projects are being rammed through without any community input. So I have refused to accept a dime from developers. Some of my opponents here received, despite their rhetoric about supporting tenants and what have you, received hundreds of thousands of dollars from developers, including one of the candidates has received over $1 million. So if you think that that has no influence, well, I can sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. The fact of the matter is that big money is corrupting our politics. We see it in Albany. We see it at the city level. I want to be a mayor that's not handcuffed by my contributions when I get there. I'm raising money from average New Yorkers. We have a great campaign finance system which allows you to match 6-to-1 small contributions from city residents. And those are the people that I want their support in this campaign. I am not looking for people who are looking for special treatment, crony capitalism when I become mayor. I want to run the city for all New Yorkers.
A great city is both an economic engine and a livable home for the city's residents. 3 of the 14 new buildings that NYCHA, the Housing Authority, proposes for infill development are in Douglas houses. What steps will you take as mayor to stop this program? How do you strike a balance between economic development and a livable city? Oh, and Park West Village too. DH Home Life.
Well, I think the premise behind this proposed infill program is a sham. You're saying that NYCHA needs more money to upkeep the buildings and to maintain the quality of life for NYCHA residents. I think last year it was exposed that NYCHA was sitting on $42 million of funds that could have been and should have been used on to install security cameras. 84. I remember it being 42. We'll check those numbers. But my office looked into it more deeply, and we found that NYCHA was sitting on $1 billion. Billion with a B. $1 billion of capital funds that should have long ago been used to repair the elevators, the door locks, fix the boilers, improve the windows and the lighting so that NYCHA residents' lives could be made better. And so now they're claiming poverty, that they need this revenue stream. With infill, they'll be able to generate $30 to $50 million a year in revenue to help upkeep the NYCHA buildings. They should, number one, manage better. Number two, they shouldn't keep piles of money lying around under the proverbial mattress while they go out and ask people to pay for more. And number three, NYCHA residents, which make up 600,000 of our fellow New Yorkers, have to be treated with respect by City Hall. It's not just the board members of NYCHA. It's not just the chairman of NYCHA. The mayor of New York City needs to pay attention to 600,000 people that he or she actually works for. And that's NYCHA. That's what we have to support.
I agree with John that I think the Bloomberg administration has treated public housing as an afterthought, even though it's over 500,000 people. And the next mayor, what I would do is make the public housing agenda front and center. I disagree with John about some of the economics. I think NYCHA is hurting. I think you're talking about a lot of older developments. We have lost a huge amount of federal support in recent years, starting even back in the Reagan years, and the effects of Sandy on a number of developments in parts of the city was profound and really damaging. So what I would say is this: the Bloomberg proposal can't be trusted. The Bloomberg proposal can't be trusted because there has been a rush at the end of this administration to try and privatize, contract out, close schools, you name it. We see what's going on. He's trying to leave his legacy, he's trying to leave his imprint, whether it's a good idea or not. I don't believe it. I don't think it's transparent. I don't think there are guarantees for local residents. I think people who are worried about losing their units have every right to be worried. There has to be some way in the future with real checks and balances, real controls, to make sure we bring some new revenue into NYCHA and in the process help fix developments in the area and get jobs for NYCHA residents in the process. But I don't believe that the Bloomberg plan will do that.
I'm very skeptical of the Bloomberg plan as well. I was at the Frederick Douglass houses the other night, and tenants there are frustrated. They just don't trust NYCHA. They don't trust the city. So to propose something like this at this time, when many apartments are in disrepair, the tenants are complaining about so many different issues, is really bad timing. We have to reestablish a rapport and a trust between tenants and the city fathers. It doesn't exist there, and then we could begin talking about other issues. I mean, we have a real lack of affordable housing in the city. Thousands, tens of thousands of apartments in NYCHA are warehoused right now. We need to repair those apartments and bring people into them so they can live them and mitigate some of the problems we're seeing with homelessness and with a lack of affordable housing. That's an important treasure to the city of New York. And as was pointed out by some of my colleagues up here, the Bloomberg administration is beginning to sell off assets. Today it was public assets, libraries in Brooklyn Heights and Manhattan. Schools are being sold off. It's a fire sale. I mean, Brooklyn Heights has this great library. It's been there for years. And neighborhoods are just not about luxury condominiums. They're about libraries, schools, mass transit. That's what makes neighborhoods. And we're beginning to sell off the city to developers to build more condos, luxury condos, not even affordable housing. It's wrong and it's got to be stopped.
Let's just call this for what it is. This is a sham. I was at Douglas Houses last week, and this proposal, for those of you who don't know, this is using the land there and in other places and leasing it for 99 years to developers to do luxury housing. If we had this to do all over again, and now I'm talking about going back into the 80s and 90s, remember all the land and all the buildings that the city of New York had? And we gave it away. We gave it away. And right now, if we had it to do all over again, we'd have tens of thousands of people who would be able to afford to live in the city of New York. What has happened at the New York City Housing Authority is a nightmare story. They have warehoused. When I was controller, I did a number of audits that pointed out they've warehoused thousands of apartments, not for a year or 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. They said, we're going to repair them. We're going to renovate them. Well, they do have $1 billion sitting on the side that they haven't used. $1 billion. If we're going to use our land, and that is the one commodity that we have in this city that you can't recreate. Once you get rid of it, once you allow it to be used for something, we no longer have an opportunity at it. We need to use that land for affordable housing. We need to use that land for moderate and middle income housing. We need to repair the units in the New York City Housing Authority. And by building middle and moderate workforce housing, what we do, it throws off revenue also that we can use to help to subsidize housing authority. So we don't need to give our land away for luxury housing. We need to be able to use it for affordable housing so we can afford to stay here in the city of New York.
In my opinion, there is no question that basically auctioning off housing authority property to the highest bidder for luxury housing is a terrible idea. This will take a scarce resource we have, publicly owned land, and Billy's right. There was a time when we had a lot of it. That's not the case anymore. That shortage of publicly owned land puts an even bigger responsibility on all of us to use what's left of it in the highest and best way. And to auction it off when it is unclear what NYCHA is actually doing with the money it has, and then it does need more money, but how much exactly, we don't know, because they're not spending the money that they have. To do that in a way where that land will be gone forever, and we can never bring it back, is just an irresponsible idea. Now also, not one tenants association, not one community board affected by this proposal has had any moment where they have been able to give any input in this idea. Look, the idea of having a discussion about how you could use land on housing authority developments to develop more affordable housing, that's a good idea. We did it in Chelsea with a parking lot that was part of Elliott Chelsea houses. We developed affordable housing there with the input of the Tenants Association, with the input of the community board. And the reason we were able to do it is because the property wasn't sold. It was at zero. And we were able to get a developer to do that. That was driven by the community, not driven by City Hall. So what we all really have to focus on immediately is there could be a request for proposal that goes out at the end of this month for developers to tell us how much they'll pay to develop luxury housing. And just last week, we in the council, and I want to recognize my colleague, Councilmember Gail Brewer, who's joined us, spoke out against that. We all need to send a message, stop the RFP, stop this proposal and stop it right now, because we will never get that land back.
One last question, we get to wrap up, and we all get to leave. How do you make certain that all New Yorkers get to exercise their right to vote?
New York City, no, the state of New York and New York City don't make it convenient for people to be able to vote. You need to be able, if we want to talk about people and making it convenient, then we need to do things like, maybe we should have voting instead of on a Tuesday from 6 to 9. You see other states and other places that make it so that people can vote on weekends. They can vote over multiple days. They can vote early. They can vote. There's so many ways that we can work to make it more convenient to say to people, we want you to be part of the process. Shorter periods of time for registration. Right now, if you don't register, and I forget, is it 3 months ahead of time or is it 2 months? Then you can't vote. You're not allowed to vote. Shorten those periods of time to make it easier for people to register later and then to go out and vote. One thing is we look at New York State, New York City, the laws work against people voting. If anything, it works to restrict. And those who have been knocked off the rolls, I stood next to, I stood next to someone voting the last time. They lost his card. And they weren't going to allow him to vote, even though they should have allowed him. And he finally forced them, and they found his card. Another person, and to be honest about it, this was Michael Hardy, who works with Reverend Sharpton, and you want to talk about knowing that his card was there. Michael wasn't going to be allowed to vote. New York City, and particularly, last but not least, how did we come up with these ridiculous ballots and ways to vote? I mean, honestly, someone should go to jail for this. To be able to fill this little box in, and wait on one line to get your thing, to fill a box in, to be able to scan it on the other line, I can't understand who thought that was a good idea. It works against people voting also.
Timing being everything, I really do want to take a moment to thank Gail Brewer, who chairs our Government Operations Committee, who has been as vigilant as anybody on this issue of how to get the Board of Elections to do the best job they can, how to make these crazy machines work. Mail on the Pony Express touched a fewer hands than your ballot touches by the time you fill it out and put it in the sliding machine at the end of the process. But Gail has been terrific in this, particularly following up on the problems we had the first go-round with those ballots. I want to say I agree with everything former Comptroller Thompson has said about the reforms we need to make. I would add that having to switch your party a year in advance is an incredibly and just unacceptably burdensome part of the process that also needs to be changed. There isn't any reason why we're not making it easier for people to vote, and also making voter registration opportunities, things like Motor Voter and things like that, available more accessibly, because that's the first step in the process. But we need to move as quickly as we can to allow people to vote earlier, to register closer, if not on the day of the election, to switch their party in a much closer period of time, to think about voting over different days, or minimally, to vote on weekends. What do you do if you end up on an election day and you have to work late, but you had to take your child to childcare in the morning, so you couldn't even go at 6 a.m. You may really want to exercise that right to vote, but not be able to for legitimate reasons. A weekend or multiple day voting would make an enormous step forward, as well as the other ideas we've already put out there.
We've been to a lot of candidate forums, and I got to say that this is the first time that this question has been brought up. And it speaks volumes to the sophistication of this group here. We have seen too many voter suppression movements taking place in different parts of the country. Movements that make it harder for minorities to vote, for senior citizens to vote, for people with disabilities to vote. Those have to be turned back every time we encounter any kind of movement in that direction that makes it harder for people to vote. Here in the city of New York, we have seen some of that as well. From the practical applications of these voting machines and the slips that we have to fill out nowadays, to even the ability of the Board of Elections to make the count, to see how many votes each candidate got. And so there are lots of improvements that we can make, but to address the issue of making it easier for voters to vote, I do think that we have to get away from this system where it's always been that one day on a Tuesday is the only day that you can vote, and you have to show up from 6 to 9, and you can't even get an absentee ballot if you're going to be in the city, even though you will not be able to get to the poll site during those hours. We've got to liberalize this, the system so that more people who, you know, there are lots more people who want to vote. But the system is artificially making it difficult, if not impossible, for too many of our fellow New Yorkers to cast their ballot and exercise their right to vote. We have to change that, and we have to change it right away.
You know, I think bluntly, in this city, in this state, we aren't like the red states that John talked about, where voter suppression is out in the open and is made, you know, codified as a matter of law. Here you have voter suppression with a velvet glove. Okay, you have so many ways in which the number of people who are voting is held down. There are plenty of people in the political class of this city and state that are just as happy to have fewer people voting. It's no surprise that every solution that was discussed here, same-day registration, early voting, voting on different days. Why has none of that happened in what's supposed to be the most progressive state in the nation? How is that possible? Well, it is in fact because there's been a willingness by the political class to make voting difficult, to make registration difficult. By the way, to make ballot access difficult. I had a part of a week in 2009. I was a legitimate member, a legitimate candidate for public advocate, but my election lawyer was a very experienced guy, a longtime West Sider, Henry Berger, wrote a page number wrong on my petitions, and I was thrown off the ballot. And that was normal. One page number out of place and legitimate candidates off the ballot. So this is not about just a few reforms. This is about a fundamentally different approach at the city and state level that actually thinks and acknowledges that it is disgusting how few people vote, how few people are able to vote, how few people feel empowered and supported in voting in this city and state. And if we want to make this a more progressive and compassionate city, and a city where we address the inequities that pervade our life, we've got to get every kind of person voting. Or we should not be surprised that those changes are harder to make. This is the kind of reform we have to achieve.
This is a great question. 4 years ago, I think the turnout was like 7% in New York City. It's tragic, really tragic, and you know, some of my opponents up here are acting outraged about it, like they're John Q. Public. But they've been in office all these years, and we know the problems, and we know how to fix them. The problem is, and Bill pointed out, and he's very good at pointing things out. There is a political obstructionism going on. The party machines want to keep people from voting for obvious reasons, because the less people vote, the more control some of these organizations have. And the Board of Elections is basically a patronage operation. And what I want to do as mayor is professionalize it. I want to give them an independent budget so they don't have to depend on going to beg to the city council every year, the state legislature for money. It's so vital to our democracy that it's malpractice not to make it an independent, but like the independent budget office that we have in the city. They don't know anybody anything. They're independent, they get their budget, and they come out with projections which are honest and transparent every year. We should not have a Board of Elections that's controlled by political appointees of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. Some of them are horrific, probably couldn't get a job in the private sector, probably, many of them. What I would recommend is professionalizing the Board of Elections, giving it an independent budget, and let's do it properly so we can address some of these issues. These things are not happening by accidents. These are designed to keep people from voting. So it's outrageous. In a city like New York, a progressive city, we have a board of elections that's almost dysfunctional. I'm going to change that as mayor.
Well, this ends the overwhelming consensus part of the program. And we've got to move on to final wrap-up. I just want to note that Scott Stringer just walked in. Each candidate will get a minute to remind us of why he or she is the best person to be voting for. Let's start with Sal Albanese, because we ended with him last time, and work our way this way.
Thanks, Ken, and thank you for coming out. This is heartening. It's great for democracy, this kind of turnout. And this area has always been known for enlightened politics, and I'm happy to be here tonight to discuss my candidacy. And you heard a lot of rhetoric here tonight. A lot of ideas are being proposed, but let me make one thing perfectly clear. None of these ideas would come to fruition if you get elected indebted to special interests. You can take polls and figure out how to talk to people, how to massage different statements, but what really counts is who supports your candidacy, who's contributing to your campaign. That's the essence of what this is all about. I'm raising my money from regular New Yorkers who are interested in good government. I'm the only person you could count on who has a record of independence and will put the interest of New Yorkers over developers, special interests, and build a better New York with all of you. Thank you so much.
You know, I've said we're living a tale of two cities because the disparities in this city are unacceptable, unsustainable, don't reflect our values. If we're going to address them, we have to use the tools of this government to actually reach people in need. For example, we need paid sick days for everyone who needs it. Everyone who needs it. And we can't wait to do that. When I'm mayor, it's my plan to make sure that paid sick days reaches every person in this city, in any company with 5 or more employees, now. Not in a few years, not depending on how the economy is now. That's the difference between me and some candidates. There's a difference between me and some candidates on the ability and the willingness to tax the wealthy. We have to tax the wealthiest New Yorkers so we can fix our schools. If you believe that full-day universal pre-K will change our schools, if you believe that we need to commit ourselves to after school for the future of our children, you have to be willing to get the revenue, and we can do it by asking the wealthiest New Yorkers to help us finally turn around our schools. Some of my opponents don't believe in taxing the wealthy. We have to change the way we police. We have to bring police and community back together. We need a new police commissioner. We need a strong inspector general. We need to fundamentally reform and change the approach to stop and frisk because it's hurting too many communities in this city. Hold on. I'll finish without it and say, and that's, thank you very much, and that's a difference too. Because if you want to change the police department, you can't keep the same police commissioner in place and expect to change the police department. So I'll finish by saying thank you to everyone who put this together. Thank you to everyone here. Thank you to Ken. There are some real differences. Sure, we're Democrats and we agree on some things. But we have some fundamental differences on the future of this city. And if you agree that the status quo is not working for a huge percentage of New Yorkers and it's not sustainable, then I need your help to change the city. It's something we have to do together. Thank you.
Once again, it's been a real privilege to talk about all these important issues in front of all of you. As I mentioned before, I'm proud to be someone who came to this country, to this city, and really to have the ability to pursue and in many ways achieve the American dream. Sal always says that he's the only one that is not a career politician. I do want to point out that most of my career has not been in politics or government. And in fact, my training is not in government. I'm a humble mathematical physics major, who then became an actuary for many years. My last firm was a firm called PricewaterhouseCoopers. I wanted to give something back to the city that gave me and my family tremendous opportunities, and that's why I ran for city council in the first place. And Thought it'd be a few years there. It wound up becoming 8 years. Again, I was not going to go beyond 8 years in overturning the will of the people. And I ran for city controller instead, and I can't believe it's now coming up on 4 years as city controller. It would be an incredible honor to be able to serve as mayor of, in my humble opinion, the greatest city in the world. Thank you.
Professor Sherrill, thank you very much for leading this forum tonight. And thank you everybody at CFD for pulling it together. And, as Billy said, for asking us not just one, but a number of questions we've never been asked before at these forums. And we have been to a lot of forums already. So that's a good mark, another good mark for CFD. But most importantly, thank you all for coming out tonight. You know, I have been so lucky to get to be Speaker of the City Council for the past 7.5 years. And it's been a way that I've been able to start to pay my debt back to the city of New York. You know, all 4 of my grandparents, about 100 years ago, came over from Ireland to New York City. They came here having never been here, with no real hope probably they'd ever get to go back to their home country, because they heard that great things could happen here. They heard that this was a place, if you ask them, where actually magical things could happen for them and their families. And that's what happened. All of my grandparents got into the middle class. All of their children went to college. All of their grandchildren, and some, my sister smarter than me, went to graduate school. That's what New York City can be. A place of opportunity for people. And as Speaker, I've worked hard, and as Mayor, I've worked hard to make it an even greater place of opportunity. And that means keeping it the safest big city in America, but a place where we police with our communities, not against our communities. It means growing good jobs, as we've done already, bringing manufacturing jobs to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, creating a network of incubators across our city so entrepreneurs can start up new companies, and expanding that through further neighborhood-based economic development in places like the South Bronx and Sunset Park and the North Shore of Staten Island. And it means not just saying this is a city for renters, but again, making it a city for renters with the strongest rent protection laws we've ever had in our city. And it means moving our city to a place where every neighborhood has a quality school. And your access to quality education doesn't depend on what zip code you live in. We can do that by taking steps to extend our school day, by expanding full-day pre-kindergarten, by building on the success we all had, successfully delivering mandatory kindergarten to every school in our city come September. We can come together and do all of that for our city, and I want to thank you for recognizing that what we need in a next mayor isn't somebody who can just criticize and point out things that might not be going well, but somebody who can identify solutions, bring people together in support of those solutions, and get those solutions implemented, as I've done as Speaker and as I'll do as Mayor, working with all of you in the great team that is the City of New York.
Again, let me thank CFD for putting together this small forum this evening. You know, 2013 is New York City at a crossroads. What direction are we going to go in? Are we going to go down the same path that we've been going down for the last 12 years? 4 years too long. Let us remember that also. 4 years too long. Or are we going to go down a different path? A path that keeps New York City safe at the same point while we protect our constitutional rights and make sure that things like stop and frisk aren't abused and misused? Are we going to go down a path where our education system continues to focus on standardized testing, that doesn't focus on comprehension and critical thinking, a system that continues to fail our students? We see right now almost 80% of our young people who graduate can't do college-level work. There's something wrong. Are we going to go down the same path that builds more luxury housing? Or are we going to focus on rebuilding our housing authority, making sure we build affordable housing across the city of New York for all New Yorkers so that we can afford to stay in the city that we love? Are we going to continue to go down the path that gets rid of small businesses? and changes the flavor and nature of communities in the businesses that come in. Chain stores and so many other things. What direction is New York City going to go in 2013? I served as comptroller for 8 years. I chose not to run again after my second term. Instead, I ran against the richest person in the city of New York, Mike Bloomberg. I know what it's like to stand up and take on the fight and represent the people of this city. I want to be your mayor and stand up and represent all New Yorkers. We haven't had a mayor in 20 years who's represented all New Yorkers. 20 years. It is time that we had someone in City Hall who will work for us, who will stand up and fight for us. I believe that I'm that person. West Side, CFD, I need your help. With your help, there is absolutely no doubt I'll be the next mayor of the city of New York, and we will have someone in City Hall who will work and represent all New Yorkers again. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I really want to thank everybody. This has been a wonderful evening. This is a wonderful tribute to our community, to the quality of our candidates.